Okay, good evening, and thank you for joining us on afikra tonight. The presentation is about an article that I read on Ahram. It's called Between Art and Activism, Inji Efflatoun's Life Revisited. This is the link to the article, and the source is the section on Ahram Online that's called Arts and Culture. And it's basically an online resource for art, culture, news, and things that are happening in that sphere. And they cover visual arts, performance arts, and music of all sorts. It's really cool. Recommend you guys check it out. So basically, a little background about Angie Aflatoun. She was born in Cairo in 1924. In an aristocratic upbringing, and she was raised by a single mother who used to design and make high-end dresses for the royal Egyptian family. And so she really grew up interacting with that high society up until her late teens. And at some point, she had the opportunity to move to France, which her sister did, but she actually refused to do that. And she said that for her, she wanted to create a new life for herself. And for her, that meant staying back home and connecting to her roots, which I found that very interesting, because usually people, when they think about starting a new life or a new chapter, it's almost always like relocating to a new place and recreating themselves. But for her, she chose to stay in Egypt and reconnecting to her home culture. Around the age of 15 years old, Mahmoud Said, who was also an Egyptian painter, he was well established at the time. He was visiting them at home, and he noticed that she has a talent for painting. She has interesting insight that needs to be developed. So he asked his friend Kamil al-Talmasani to tutor her. And both Mahmoud Said and Kamil al-Talmasani were co-founders, or actually I'm not sure about Mahmoud Said, but Kamil al-Talmasani was a co-founder of the Egyptian Art and Freedom Group movement, which really experimented with different forms of art and established a lot of kind of like precedents in art in Egypt. And so Kamil al-Talmasani agreed begrudgingly, and he felt that this could be a challenge because Inji comes from a very sheltered life, and she might not have, the kind of insight or introspection to explore art as art should be explored. But she actually surprised him a lot in the kind of work that she was making. So her earlier forms of art include Surrealism, and in general, Surrealism is considered a rebellious art form in its essence against reality. Basically, the artists tap into their imagination and into painting in the language of dreams. So that kind of a way to rebel against the reality, which at the time in Egypt really meant poverty, ignorance, and disease for the mass populations. And those three things were the seeds of the 1952 revolution. So we can see here this painting by Inji, Girl and Monster, and it shows a girl who is crouching naked in kind of a forest of monsters. And she was about, I think, 17 at the time when she drew that. So she really surprised her tutor with the level of creativity that she can come up with, despite her sheltered background. And then her art kind of started evolving as she got more and more exposed to the local people, as she stepped out of her, the circles that she was born into. So, and she started getting more and more involved into activism and feminism. She committed genuinely to connecting to her Egyptian roots, not as the bourgeois ones, like I mentioned, more into like the working class and the working people. And so we see this painting here on the right. It's called Mensa, and it's from her first solo exhibit in 1952, which reflected on the mass protests of 1951 against the British presence in Egypt. And we see a lot of like there's a sea of women basically, and that was really her attempt to show that the revolutions and the activism wasn't just a male-dominated space, but women were very much present, and they were making their participation known in what was happening on the ground by the people. So because of her affiliations, with activism and communism, she was incarcerated in the crackdown by Jamal Abdel Nasser, and she was imprisoned between the years of 1959 and 1963. She spent a lot of time in solitary confinement, but also with other female prisoners. And during that time, really, her style changed a lot. She started drawing things that were more expressionist, focusing more on the subject matter of her paintings, and included humans, more like clearer features. In her paintings, she really sought to capture a more raw and candid representation of the plight of women. She tried to capture the agony of the Egyptian society, and there's like a series of portraits of the prisoners where she kind of dabbled with color and light to reflect the anguish of the life in confinement. For example, these are some of the paintings that she produced while she was in prison. And we can kind of see two distinct forms of representations. The two paintings on the left are more focused on like an individual person. Both of these are from the series Portrait of a Prisoner. And we can see this kind of intensity in their gaze. The expression that kind of varies between great distress and like icy fixity. And she played around with linear drawings to draw like harsh facial features. She also played around with the skin tones, with the geometric juxtapositions that we can see on the faces, like with the different colors and all. And on the right, it's a completely different type of painting. These are more group scenes in which we see faceless figures, but all huddled together. People kind of estimate that she was trying to allude to the dehumanization of the inmates by the prison system, and which I thought was really interesting, because in both of these types of paintings, she's portraying life in prison, but she's conveying very different things in each of them, which was worth pausing and really like looking into the paintings. And then after prison, she was released in 1963. And so after prison, she really transformed into something that was in her art, something that was more reaching outward, because life in prison was a very like stark contradiction to what she had grown up into. And so when she got out of prison, she was yearning for something that's a bit more open, a bit more colorful, and that really reflected in the art that she was making. And so she would paint open spaces, pastoral subjects, and her color palette changed a lot. There were less murky colors, as you saw in the previous paintings versus this one, and more open spaces, like I said. And towards the end of her life, there was worldwide recognition. Her works were exhibited in several cities in Europe, including the Venice Biennale, Rome, Berlin, Paris, Prague, and a lot of other cities in Europe, all the way to New Delhi, actually, not just in Europe. And I feel like this quote kind of really like summarizes, this is from the article, and I feel like it really summarizes what she aspired to do. The artist, rebel, and woman who searched for her roots at a young age, rebelling against a life in bourgeoisie isolation, acquired and solidified her Egyptian identity through the years. Aflatoun's love for her heritage and a desire to belong to this culture drove her art and activism. It just really sums up this beautiful fusion between what she held very personal as her identity, connecting to her roots on the one hand, and on the other hand, kind of like exploring her artistic side and fusing those two things together. And that's that's pretty much it for the presentation. Thank you for listening. These are some additional resources to learn more about Aflatoun's legacy, her journey. There's a bit more details as well on specifically the more technical details that I don't think I can explain very well about the art that she produced while she was in prison, and a bunch of other sources on her big bibliography. And thank you for listening. These are my contact information.